Dark palace corridors, flickering torchlight. A young man lies in bed. Nero, Emperor of Rome. The door creaks open. A woman enters, not a concubine, not a slave, but his own mother, Agrippina. Whispers echo in the chamber. Was it politics or perversion that drove her here? The chroniclers of Rome left only fragments, but what they wrote was shocking enough, that the woman who gave Rome its emperor also gave him her bed, and through that scandal, she sought to rule an empire built on blood, fire, and lust. This is not the Rome you read in history books. This is the Rome of forbidden nights, of power twisted into pleasure. Stay with me, because the truth of Agrippina is darker than myth, and far more dangerous. If you think history hides its most disturbing truths, subscribe now, because tonight, we descend into the scandal of a queen who ruled Rome through her son's desire. Rome's greatest empire was not shaken first by war or famine, but by whispers. They crept through marble corridors, carried by senators, slaves, and courtiers alike. Whispers that the Emperor Nero, barely a man in his 20s, was sharing his bed, not with some courtesan, nor with a noblewoman, but with his own mother, Agrippina. According to the historian Suetonius, the relationship between mother and son was so scandalous that Nero could not be separated from her embraces. Tacitus, always cautious, admits the rumor, but hints that it may have been political poison spread by enemies. Yet the very fact that such an accusation could gain traction reveals something deeper. In Rome, the greatest fear was not an invading army, but corruption from within. Picture the Senate Hall. Bronze lamps flicker, casting long shadows across pillars etched with Rome's laws. Senators gather in hushed tones, leaning closer so the guards won't overhear. One mutters, "The emperor is ruled not by his counsel, but by his mother's lust." Another replies, "Then we are not subjects of Nero, we are subjects of Agrippina." Beyond the Senate, slaves and courtiers repeat the same story in taverns and kitchens, their voices trembling. They know the danger of a rumor in Rome. Speak too loudly, and a dagger may find your back. Stay silent, and the secret festers like a wound no one dares to lance. For ordinary Romans, the story was unthinkable. To accuse a mother of seducing her son violated the very foundation of family and law. Yet the empire was addicted to scandal. The more forbidden the tale, the faster it spread. Let us pause in that imperial chamber for a moment. The curtains drawn, incense heavy in the air. Nero, young, restless, already intoxicated with wine and theatre. And Agrippina, draped in jewels, her eyes sharp as daggers, stepping into the role of not just mother, but consort. Whether or not the bed was truly shared, the image itself was enough to terrify Rome, because Agrippina had already proven she could bend men to her will. She had seduced emperors, poisoned rivals, and placed her son on the throne. If she now used her own body to chain him, then no senator, no general, no priest stood a chance of breaking her grip. According to Cassius Dio, Agrippina often appeared at Nero's side in public, dressed like an empress, even like a bride. To Romans, appearances were everything, and appearances suggested not merely maternal affection, but something darker, something ritualized, almost ceremonial. We must ask, was this accusation true, or the sharpest dagger of propaganda? Some historians argue it was slander crafted by Nero's enemies to delegitimize his reign. Others suggest that whether the physical act occurred or not, the psychological seduction was undeniable. Agrippina's power over her son was real, and it terrified Rome more than swords ever could. Aphorism. In Rome, rumor was not idle, it was a weapon. And this weapon painted Agrippina not just as a schemer, but as a mother who blurred the sacred line between womb and throne, between birth and rule. But to understand how Agrippina reached such heights, how she could make the empire itself tremble with whispers of incest, we must go back to her childhood in Rome's most dangerous family, back to a world where power, sex, and bloodshed were not separate, but intertwined. For Agrippina was not born a monster. She was forged in the furnace of Rome itself, a city where even innocence could be turned into a weapon. To understand Agrippina, we must understand her world. Rome was a city that preached virtue but practiced vice. Its statues proclaimed honor, discipline, and loyalty to the gods. Yet behind palace doors, the same leaders who paraded morality in public surrendered to lust, cruelty, and ambition in private. Roman citizens lived by a strange code. In the Forum, Dignity was everything. In the villa, decadence was expected. Women were praised for chastity in speech, but traded like coins in political marriages. Men who scolded others for indulgence visited brothels by night. The hypocrisy was not a secret. It was the system. Aphorism. In Rome, law was carved in stone, but lust was written in flesh. This contradiction was nowhere sharper than in the imperial household. The emperor was meant to be the father of the Roman people. Yet the throne was already stained with scandal long before Nero. Caligula, Agrippina's own brother, was accused of parading his sisters as lovers, flaunting them at banquets like prizes. Claudius, later Agrippina's husband, had a court infamous for freedmen manipulating his every move, and for wives poisoning rivals to secure succession. Even Augustus, the empire's founder, wove marriages and divorces into weapons of dynastic strategy. By the time Agrippina came of age, the precedent was set. The body could be as sharp a tool as the sword. But the Roman people, ordinary merchants, soldiers, slaves, saw these scandals differently. To them, emperors lived almost as gods, their behavior both shocking and untouchable. Consider the festivals. In the daytime, Romans watched gladiators hack each other apart, or beasts maul condemned criminals. At night, they whispered of the emperor's private games, banquets drowning in wine, orgies veiled in secrecy, and alliances sealed in the most humiliating of ways. The palace was an arena of its own, and Agrippina understood it better than anyone. For women of her class, survival was not guaranteed. A wrong marriage could mean exile, a rumor could mean death, even blood ties offered no protection. Agrippina had watched her sister Drusilla fall victim to Caligula's madness, and her cousin Livilla destroyed by court conspiracies. This was the world she inherited, a Rome where ambition demanded a sacrifice, and the cost was often one's body. Aphorism. To be born noble in Rome was to be born in a cage gilded with blood. And so, when whispers later accused Agrippina of using her son as a consort, Rome was not shocked because it was impossible. Rome was shocked because it was believable. They had seen emperors burn cities, marry horses, and kill their own kin. To them, incest in the palace was not fantasy. It was a logical extension of absolute power. Into this crucible of corruption, Agrippina was born. She was not a victim of Rome's decadence. She was its product, and soon she would rise from pawn to queen. She was born in 15 AD, the daughter of Germanicus, Rome's golden general, and Agrippina the Elder, a woman of noble blood. From birth, her life was tied to power, and therefore to danger. Her family was adored by the people but envied by emperors, and envy in Rome was fatal. Her childhood was marked by trauma. When her father Germanicus died, possibly poisoned on orders from Emperor Tiberius, her mother became a target. Agrippina the Elder was exiled and starved to death. Her brothers were hunted. Her uncle Caligula would rise as emperor, only to plunge Rome into madness. Agrippina grew up surrounded by betrayal, murder, and intrigue. In Rome, childhood was not innocence. It was initiation. As a young woman, Agrippina was married off to Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, a brutal aristocrat known for arrogance and cruelty. Their marriage was not of love, but of calculation. Through him, she bore a son, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, the boy history would know as Nero. Agrippina endured her husband's abuses with icy patience. She learned the art of endurance, of watching and waiting. When he died, she was left widowed, her son still a child. For most Roman women, this might have been an end. For Agrippina, it was an opening. Her brother Caligula briefly offered her power, naming her and her sisters as honorary priestesses. But his reign soon turned to chaos. He flaunted her in public, treated his sisters like trophies, then cast her aside when paranoia consumed him. Accused of conspiracy, Agrippina was exiled to a barren island. Most would have perished there. But Agrippina endured. She studied her enemies, learned who betrayed her, and stored away names like weapons for later use. When Caligula was assassinated in 41 AD, the tides shifted again. His uncle, Claudius, became emperor, and Agrippina was recalled from exile. From that moment, Agrippina's ambition sharpened. She maneuvered carefully, presenting herself as loyal, humble, and harmless. But behind that mask, she was planning her return to Rome's center of power. Her second marriage, to a wealthy consul. expanded her fortune. With wealth came influence, with influence came allies, and all the while she raised Nero, molding him not only as her son, but as her instrument. Cassius Dio later observed that Agrippina possessed a masculine ambition in a woman's body. She did not seek survival alone, she sought supremacy. When the moment came, she seized it. Claudius, the awkward scholar emperor, widowed and vulnerable, was within reach. Agrippina would charm him, seduce him, and become his empress. Through him, she would place Nero directly in line for the throne. Agrippina had endured exile, humiliation, and betrayal. Now she was ready to strike, and Rome would soon discover that the most dangerous weapon in the empire was not the sword, but a mother's ambition. By 49 AD, the widow Agrippina returned to Rome not as a victim, but as a predator. The emperor Claudius, awkward and bookish, had outlived several wives. To many he seemed harmless. To Agrippina, he seemed vulnerable. According to Tacitus, she ensnared him with calculated charm, presenting herself as dutiful niece, grieving widow, and devoted mother. But beneath that mask, she was positioning herself for the boldest act of her life, to become Empress of Rome. This was unprecedented. A woman marrying her own uncle defied both custom and morality, yet Agrippina persuaded the Senate to legalize the union. The laws of Rome bent before her ambition. Once she was empress, Agrippina wasted no time. She demanded respect, not as a shadow behind the throne, but as a co-ruler. Coins were struck with her image alongside Claudius, something no imperial woman had achieved before. But her true prize was Nero. With relentless cunning, she convinced Claudius to adopt her son. Overnight, Nero was elevated above Claudius's own natural son, Britannicus, and declared heir to the empire. Suetonius records that Agrippina celebrated this triumph with open arrogance, reminding senators that it was her will, not the emperor's, that shaped Rome's future. She was not merely a wife, she was a kingmaker. Enemies began to fall in swift succession. Rivals at court were accused of treason and exiled. Britannicus, still a boy, was slowly pushed aside, his inheritance slipping away, and then came the whispers of poison. Ancient sources hint that when Claudius began to favor Britannicus again, Agrippina acted. In 54 AD, Claudius fell ill after a feast. Tacitus claims mushrooms, his favorite dish, were laced with poison. The food of the gods, some joked, and the poison of an emperor. Whether true or not, Claudius never recovered. The throne was left vacant, and Nero, at just 16 years old, was proclaimed Emperor of Rome. On the day of Nero's coronation, Agrippina stood beside him, radiant in jewels, commanding in presence. Witnesses said she looked less like a grieving widow than a queen crowned with victory. She had achieved what no Roman woman ever had. She placed her son on the throne and stood as the empire's most powerful woman. But her ambition did not stop there. Agrippina sought not just to influence Nero, but to dominate him, completely. Aphorism. She had not given Rome an emperor, she had given Rome herself. And so the stage was set. A teenage emperor, malleable and inexperienced, a mother whose ambition knew no limits. Their bond was not just political, it would soon be whispered as something far more forbidden. Rome believed it had crowned Nero. In truth, Rome had crowned Agrippina, and her throne, some claimed, was her own son's bed. The boy emperor was crowned. Nero, only 16, wore the laurel wreath of Caesar, but beside him stood a figure even more commanding, Agrippina. She was no longer merely empress, no longer merely mother. To the eyes of Rome, she appeared as something more dangerous, a consort. At public ceremonies, she did not stand behind Nero. She walked at his side. When foreign envoys came to offer tribute, Agrippina received them seated upon a golden throne next to her son. Ancient observers were horrified. For a woman to share the stage with the emperor was scandal enough. But the intimacy between mother and son suggested something beyond politics. According to Tacitus, Nero and Agrippina were seen in public displays that blurred the line between maternal affection and forbidden closeness. Suetonius was even more direct, writing that he was said to have polluted his mother's bed. The palace itself became a theatre of rumour. Courtiers spoke of Nero being unable to resist her embraces. Guards whispered of nights when the empress entered her son's chambers, dressed not as a mother, but as a mistress. Whether or not these stories were true, almost didn't matter. In Rome, perception was reality, and the perception was damning. When power lies in the bed, the empire lies in chains. But why would Agrippina risk such whispers? Some historians believe she deliberately fed them. By presenting herself as the emperor's consort, she cut off rivals and asserted her dominance. Other sources suggest Nero himself, young, inexperienced, and impressionable, fell under her influence in ways he could not escape. Even if no incest occurred, Agrippina's presence at Nero's side was scandal enough. She controlled his letters, she vetted his appointments, she held the imperial seal, meaning nothing was official without her approval. Rome had crowned Nero, but Agrippina ruled, and this domination was reflected in ritual. Cassius Dio describes her entering banquets dressed in revealing gowns, seated beside Nero as if queen and king of a private kingdom. To the senators, forced to bow before them, the spectacle was not only humiliating, it was terrifying. For the Roman people, such whispers poisoned the heart of the empire. The idea of a mother and son entwined was not only immoral, it was unnatural. Rome could endure cruelty, extravagance, even madness. But incest was the one crime that made even hardened senators shudder. Yet the whispers would not stop. They grew louder, spreading from the Senate to the streets, from the palace guards to the brothels. The empire had crowned a boy and gotten a puppet. It had crowned a mother and gotten a queen whose throne was a scandal. Her grip on Nero was so strong, Rome wondered if he was emperor at all. But power built on whispers is fragile. As Nero grew older, he began to feel the weight of his mother's shadow. What began as a partnership twisted into rivalry, and soon, the forbidden bond that had shocked Rome would become the very reason for war between mother and son. Agrippina had ruled through lust and fear, but no chain holds forever. And Nero, the boy she made emperor, was about to turn against the woman who made him. History often remembers Agrippina's scandal as a tale of forbidden desire, but beneath the rumor lay something darker, a struggle of wills between a mother who would not release power and a son who could not escape her shadow. Agrippina had been shaped by trauma. She had watched her family destroyed by emperors. She had endured exile, abuse, and betrayal. To her, survival meant control, and the surest way to control was not armies, not laws, but the human heart. If whispers of incest cemented her grip on Nero, she would endure the shame. To her, reputation was a weapon to be wielded, not a chain to bind her. For Agrippina, scandal was not weakness. It was armor. Nero, however, was a boy thrust into a man's throne. He adored the theatre, the races, the applause of the mob. But behind closed doors, he remained fragile, yearning for freedom from the woman who had shaped him. Imagine the tension. Every decree stamped not with Nero's authority, but with Agrippina's seal. Every audience with envoys dominated by her voice. Every senator who bowed lower to the empress than to the emperor. According to Tacitus, Nero grew restless. He confided in his tutor, Seneca, and his Praetorian guard, Burrus, that he wished to rule in his own right. Yet whenever he tried to assert independence, Agrippina tightened her grip, reminding him of his debt to her. The psychology of their bond was a paradox. Agrippina craved to keep her son close, while Nero longed to push her away. He rebelled in private pleasures, seeking mistresses, indulging in debauchery, surrounding himself with flatterers who whispered that Rome needed an emperor, not a boy tethered to his mother's skirts. At first, Agrippina tolerated these diversions, believing she could outlast them. But when Nero took a lover, Poppaea Sabina, who openly mocked the Empress, the balance shifted. Poppaea represented everything Agrippina feared, another woman who might replace her influence in the emperor's bed, in his mind, and in his heart. A throne cannot seat two queens. The whispers of incest now became weapons in a deeper psychological war. Nero resented the rumors that branded him his mother's puppet. Agrippina, on the other hand, leaned into them, using proximity and suggestion to keep rivals away. Every time she stepped beside him in public, every time she placed her hand upon his arm, she reminded him, and Rome, that he was her creation. Suetonius notes that Nero once admitted he wished to be free of his mother, but feared that without her he would lose legitimacy. Agrippina herself famously declared, "Let him kill me, so long as he rules." It was less a cry of loyalty than a chilling prophecy. Their relationship was not love, it was not lust, It was power, cloaked in the intimacy of family, twisted into something Rome could neither comprehend nor forgive. And as that tension grew, the outcome became inevitable. One of them would have to fall. Agrippina had survived emperors, exile, and scandal, but she had never faced the full fury of her own son. And when Nero finally broke free, he did not simply cast her aside. He plotted her death. By the late 50s AD, the balance of power in Rome was breaking. Nero was no longer the malleable boy Agrippina had crowned. He was a man, intoxicated by theatre, by Poppaea Sabina, and by the thrill of ruling without her, and he had grown to despise his mother. Agrippina, unwilling to surrender, fought to keep her grip. She reminded the Senate of her role in placing Nero on the throne. She mocked his indulgences, criticized his lovers, and warned him that without her, the empire would crumble. What she did not realize, or perhaps refused to accept, was that every word only fueled his rage. The hand that crowns can also strangle. At first, Nero tried humiliation. He stripped her of her guards, her honors, her residence in the palace. She was forced to retreat to a villa by the sea, but still she remained defiant. Tacitus describes Agrippina boasting that she still had Britannicus's supporters, the son of Claudius, who had once been heir. She hinted that she could replace Nero if she wished. To Nero, this was treason. To Poppaea, it was confirmation. The Empress must be removed. The first attempt was poison, but Agrippina, well versed in Rome's deadliest art, had long practiced taking antidotes. She survived. The second attempt was more audacious, a collapsible boat. Nero invited his mother to a banquet and offered her passage home on a vessel rigged to sink. At midnight, the trap was sprung, the roof collapsed, the hull split, and Agrippina was cast into the waves. But Agrippina did not drown. She swam through the black waters, clinging to debris, and escaped to shore, battered but alive. Rome held its breath. If the Empress lived, would she now strike back at her son? A woman who survives the sea cannot be killed by whispers. But Nero was not finished. Soldiers were dispatched to her villa, armed with blades. When they stormed into her chamber, Agrippina is said to have bared her body, pointing to her womb, and declared, "Strike here first, for it bore Nero." It was a chilling command, half defiance, half prophecy. The assassins obeyed. Agrippina, the most powerful woman Rome had ever known, was cut down by the very empire she had ruled through her son. When word spread through Rome, the reaction was muted. Some rejoiced, others whispered in fear. But for the Senate and the people, the message was clear. Nero was now free of the mother who had made him. Yet freedom came with a cost. He was forever marked as the emperor who murdered his own mother. Even Rome, accustomed to blood and scandal, shuddered at the crime. In killing Agrippina, Nero had severed not only blood, but Rome's last restraint. The boy who had once been shaped by his mother's ambition now ruled alone. But without her, Nero's reign spiraled into chaos, excess, and eventually, destruction. Agrippina was gone, but her shadow lingered. Rome would never forget her scandal, nor forgive Nero's crime, and history would brand them both with the same word: monstrous. Agrippina was dead, but her presence lingered like smoke in the halls of Rome. Her villa by the sea became a monument to both ambition and betrayal. Nero had freed himself, but in doing so, he had committed the one act even Rome could not easily forgive: matricide. The Senate tried to frame her death as justice, spreading rumors that she had plotted against her son, but few believed it. The image of Nero's mother, struck down by his command, haunted the empire. According to Tacitus, the Roman people murmured that the gods themselves would avenge her. A throne built on a mother's blood cannot stand. Nero's reign after Agrippina's murder spiraled into chaos. Without her discipline, he indulged every whim, racing chariots, performing on stage, burning through Rome's treasury, even watching as the city itself burned. Historians from Suetonius to Cassius Dio portray his later years as the unraveling of a man who had destroyed his anchor, and in that unraveling lay Agrippina's shadow. For if Nero became a monster, was it not she who had raised him? If Nero destroyed Rome, was it not she who had made him emperor? To the ancient writers, Agrippina became a symbol of the dangerous woman, ambitious, manipulative, seductive, and ruthless. Tacitus described her as a woman with all the ambition of men, but the vices of her sex magnified. Suetonius portrayed her as a schemer who used her son's body as her throne. But history is written by men, and men feared her. Perhaps the incest rumor was slander designed to diminish her, to turn her political power into sexual scandal. Perhaps she truly did use every weapon at her disposal, even her son. The truth is lost, but the impact remains. What we do know is this: Agrippina defied every limit Rome placed on women. She bent the law to marry her uncle. She placed her son on the throne. She stood before the Senate and foreign envoys not as a wife or mother, but as an empress in her own right. In a world where women were supposed to be silent, she was thunder. In a city where women were pawns, she was a queen. Aphorism. If Rome feared Agrippina, it was because she played the empire's game, and won. Her story has echoed for centuries. Artists, playwrights, and historians return to her not because of what she did, but because of what she represents. The blurring of love and power, of family and politics, of scandal and survival, and in that way, Agrippina remains modern. History is still filled with leaders who wield intimacy as a weapon, who bend morality for ambition, who blur the line between private desire and public rule. Was Agrippina a monster who seduced her son? Or was she a victim of propaganda, a woman demonized because she outplayed men at their own game? We may never know, but one truth survives. Agrippina ruled Rome not through armies, not through laws, but through the darkest force of all: human desire. Empires fall, scandals fade, but the hunger for power endures. This has been the story of Agrippina, the queen who, through rumor or reality, ruled Rome through lust. If you believe history's darkest truths should not be buried, subscribe now, because the shadows of the past still have more secrets to tell.